have a natural instinct that we've learned with experience and we've honed in. Why is it not sufficient? Why do we have to employ the Ayin Tovah as well? Is that the question?
Yeah, just like if you can still rely on intuitive feelings and
So
operate with the Ayin Tovah like simultaneously.
right. So there it's not necessarily a contradiction, but the question mark should really be upon the natural instinct, which is where is it really coming from?
Mm-hmm.
When a person says, I naturally operate in a certain systematic manner, well, where does that really originate from within themselves? Where does that come from? What is it really revealing about themselves? Granted, Ayin Tovah, to have Ayin Tovah is something that doesn't come natural to us, because what comes natural to each and every one of us is our animal instincts, being that their animal soul is the first soul that we're introduced to upon conception. The godly soul completes its insertion into us by 12 for a woman and 13 for a man. But the first soul that we're acquainted with and that we largely operate from is our animal soul. As we discussed in the Tanya class the other night, yesterday, and throughout the other classes, that the animals we're much more familiar with the animal soul because it operates our corporal physical selves. The drawback of the animal soul is that it possesses a consciousness. As Alter Rebbe explains, the animal soul is not a negative, it's not unholy, God forbid, but rather it's neutral, and it depends in the manner in which we train it over time. If we train it in a correct manner, in a healthy manner, and usually that the training begins when we go against our natural born impulses, just like when we train a child. A child and an animal are very similar in that both don't possess an essential mind that governs their heart. The intellectual faculties in a child, as well as an animal, are included in the emotions themselves. In other words, the intellect in itself is not functioning independent of the emotions, but are born from the emotions themselves. For example, a child wants chocolate, a candy, and a child now comes up with a brilliant reasoning to explain to his parents why a chocolate is necessary for him or candy is necessary for him. He will learn spatial dimension by climbing upon the counter in order to get to the chocolate. In other words, the intellect is functioning, but it's functioning under the guise of the emotions in order to perpetuate the emotions themselves. Where in contrast, an adult, by definition, is someone whose mind functions independent of the emotions and could guide the emotions to flow properly. And that requires training. The first part of raising our children is to train them on day-to-day habits and behaviors and or communication styles, although they might not understand why. And often they will ask, why do I need to do this? It seems naturally that what you're asking me is going against my natural tendencies. But being that the parents serve as the child's intellectual faculties, the father is a chokhmah and the mother is a binah. The father is a wisdom and the mother is the understanding. The parents' charge is to raise their child, literally raise them from the muck. As we discussed in our parenting class, a child from a verse from Eov, from the book of Job, a child is born like a wild donkey, very stubborn, very coarse, and so on and so forth. But our aim as parents is to raise the child literally upwards from the muck, from being a very self-contained and selfish creature. Give me, I want, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm tired, I need, I want, it's not fair, and so on and so forth. Basically, self-absorbed into a mensch. And a mensch is humane, someone whose mind governs their heart. And the mind is subdued to Hashem. The same applies when we raise ourselves. As we discussed in last week's Tanya class, when Hashem says, Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmeinu, let us make mankind in our image, who is us? To whom is Hashem referring to us? Hashem's one. So let us make mankind means, and one of the Pirushim is Hashem and the person themselves. That the person is responsible to raise themselves to mirror their origins, Hashem's image. In other words, what's Hashem's image? God forbid, Hashem doesn't have a physical form or any type of form whatsoever. The image that the Torah is referring to are the divine attributes, the three intellectual faculties, chokhmah, binah, v'dat, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and the seven emotive traits. And that requires work. That requires first and foremost, creating or implementing atomic habits that serve as our framework and our guideline to whether we fully recognize or we fully internalize that we should act a certain way, but nevertheless, being that the Torah gives us our pathways. So whether or not we are 100% aligned yet with it, or we agree to it on a natural level, we have to embed those atomic habits within our day-to-day behaviors and modalities, and then delve into them to really understand them. And the more we understand, the more we connect to it, the more we internalize it. But again, the question is, where is it really, when we speak about natural instincts, from which soul do they emanate from? Do they emanate from the godly soul, which natural instinct is God? And therefore it employs the three levushim, the three garments of the soul, thought, speech, and action, solely for God and God alone. Thinking about God and godliness, of how to do the mitzvot and so on and so forth, to understand the Torah, to delve into the Torah and think about how it applies to us and so on and so forth, and speech, to speak the words of davening out loud and the words of learning out loud. V'dibar tabam, you should speak of them as the Torah commands us. When we learn, there's a mitzvah, not just to learn with our eyes scanning the book, but to pronounce the words out loud. When we daven, the same applies. It is important to say the words out loud. And when then the garment of action, from the godly soul's perspective, is solely dedicated to conducting oneself in accordance to Hashem's desire. Hayad notens deka, like the Gemara says, the hand that gives deka. Very interesting. When Moshe Rabbeinu in Parsha Shmot confronts the Tanya and Aviram while they're in the middle of a heated argument, a heated fight, and one of them raises their hands to strike the other one, Moshe calls out to the one who rose his hand to strike the other, Rasha lama takes recha, wicked one, why would you hit your fellow? The Torah doesn't state that the Tan struck Aviram. It doesn't say that he hit him, he just raised his hand. Rashi, the foremost commentary on the Torah, notes Shenikra Rasha Baharamat Yad, that he is called wicked just for having raised his hand. Now, he didn't carry out the strike yet. He didn't hit him. So how could the Torah call him a wicked just by raising a hand? Usually you have to come to the full deed. But the Rebbe explains in one of his talks that each one of our organs and sinews are there to transmit godliness. And therefore it must act in according to its godly function. Where the Talmud says, the hand that gives daka, the hand that puts on tefillin or lights Shabbat candles, that uplifts. That's why Hashem gave us a hand. The second the hand stops functioning in accordance to the godly soul, and it goes along and it starts functioning as an expression of the animal soul, well, now it's not acting in according to its divine purpose. In other words, it didn't do anything wrong yet. But the very fact that it's already in the process, it means it's deviating from its intention. And so too, when it comes to our thoughts, to our words, to our words and our actions. So when the question is, what is being that we have a natural instinct, do we need to override it? Do we have to introduce Ayin Tovah to it? Well, the question is first and foremost when we refer to what are we referring to when we say natural instinct? The animal soul is very instinctual, like an animal. For what purpose? For survivability. The negativity bias and the confirmation bias and in order to protect itself. It's hardwired into our brain. And so all of it, as instinctual as it may be, is there for one purpose: selfishness. Now, there's nothing wrong with surviving, chas v'shalom. But the question is, what does survival look like to the animal soul? The more we give in to the whims of the animal soul, the more it wants. To that end, the Midrash states that a person does not depart this world even having achieved half of their desire. Because as soon as a person who desired 100 achieves 100, immediately now he wants 100 is no longer sufficient. He wants more. He wants 200. Now when he achieves 200, now he wants 400. In other words, whatever we give the animal soul, it's never going to be enough. Never. It's never going to be satisfied. Because its only aim is to survive, and if survival means comfort, pleasure, and so on and so forth, because it was allowed all this luxury without an aim to it, just because I want, but just because I feel, just because of this. So for it creates all kinds of tendencies which are not just unholy, unhealthy. So the question really is, when we're referring to natural instinct, whose instinct are we referring to? It's the godly instinct, then it constantly scours out for godly opportunities in every frame of life. To this end, and we discussed this the other day, the Baal Shem Tov teaches, based on the Tehillim, on the verse of Tehillim, Re'evim v'gam tzme'im nafsham behem tidatav. They're hungry and they're thirsty, their souls are going to enwrap in it. That's the verse. Baal Shem Tov says, very interesting, why did Hashem create luxury food, savory food? Animals don't go for the taste, they go for whatever they need to eat in order to survive. Why would Hashem create this luxury food for humans to involve themselves with? Hashem Tov explains that as we know from Chassidut explains that every frame of creation and every thing in the world contains a godly spark in it that gives it its life force, its vitality, its definition, etc., etc. Including food, of course. And in actuality, food, plant life, animal, etc., etc., derives from a higher spiritual plane than even the human does. The higher something is, the lower it falls. For example, when you have a wall of bricks, we realize that the brick that falls from the first tier of the wall will fall fairly close to the wall itself, versus the wall. If a brick falls from the top tier of the wall, it'll fall significantly further away than the brick from the first tier. The higher something is, the lower it falls. The sparks that fell and gives vitality, life force to food, originate from a higher source than the sparks where we come from. For that reason, we get hungry. That hunger, the Baal Shem Tov explains, or the thirst, and particularly to particular type of foods, are not just by the way. We get attracted to certain type of foods based on the origins of our soul, and based on the interconnection between our soul and the sparks in this food. For that reason, there are those who prefer tardy foods over sweet foods, and there are those who prefer sweet food over tardy foods. Interesting, as children, we are largely attracted to sweet foods, but as we grow up, we become accustomed and even attracted to spicy foods and tardy foods, etc., etc. Because the origins of sweet food is in the divine attribute of kindness, of chesed, versus tardy food, spicy foods, derived from the divine attribute of gvura, of justice, of discipline. Gvura is higher in the origins than chesed. And therefore, as we grow, we have the capacity to raise higher sparks. The Baal Shem Tov explains the reason why we're attracted to different types of foods is because there is a soul connection and a soul elevation that's happening here. And by the way, that's the definition of kosher when it applies to food. That when we consume it, we can elevate the spark in the food and all the spark of all the process that was implemented in order to make this food. And in turn, we rise up as well. That the food becomes part and parcel of our flesh and blood. And once it becomes one with us, not only it doesn't interfere with the physical and corporal organs and sinews of processing and holding to I'm sorry, 1 second. It not only doesn't interfere with the intertwining of the body and the soul, but it actually makes the soul able to flow much more fluidly and overtly through the body, rather than creating a density, an opaqueness that the body in itself distorts the neshama. So the Baal Shem Tov explains that the reason why we're attracted to certain type of foods is because of this spiritual service that our souls descend into this world in order to engage to the world and elevate it upwards. For that reason, certain people are attracted to certain types of food or certain types of drinks, etc., etc. However, from the animal soul's perspective, food is food. On the healthiest level, the animal soul could look at it as it helps me survive. But if the animal soul is left untrained, I eat it because it tastes good. The end. Nothing's wrong. Again, there's nothing wrong that the food tastes good. And if it does, Baruch Hashem, so long as it's kosher and you say a bracha and you have the intention to elevate, Baruch Hashem, that's good. But that's not the driving force of why we eat. And what if it doesn't taste good? Are you still going to be into it? In other words, the animal soul sees within the material world nothing more than a chance to amplify itself. Without any reasoning other than because it feels good. When we look at the world around us, the world obsesses over living longer and owning more. Because that's the animal soul's desire. I want more of life. I want more of property. But for what purpose? Why do you need more time? Why do you need more things? But as we learned, the godly soul looks at it differently. Rather than being obsessed with adding more years to our life, we have to add more life to our years. In other words, fine, the physical is exactly what we're here for, but there has to be a divine purpose which is flowing through it, that's revealing that it's revealing that the physical is revealing. And even when it comes to, as the Rebbe explains in one talk, there's no such thing as parv in our world, neutral. For example, in speech or in behaviors, no such thing. Even if currently it looks like it's neutral, it's not really leaning towards holiness, and definitely is not leading to unholiness. Right now, it doesn't matter. In this world, everything moves one direction or another. So the Rebbe gives an example. For example, a person who goes to work and has to speak about the mundane aspects of work, whether it's in business or mechanics or content creation, whatever it is, to deal with the nitty-gritty. So right now, they're not talking Torah. But if the intention is to utilize the workspace in order to elevate every physical thing that we come into contact with and the people that we're around, or even with this particular project, that the aim is to ultimately utilize the money that is gained from this project to maintain a holy kosher life, as well as to be generous with tzedakah, to help the world around us. So although currently, right now, the discussion and the activity is not holy per se, but it's part and parcel of a holy process, and therefore it's moving towards holiness. But if the entire thought behind it is, well, I need money. Why do you need money? So I could pay bills. Why do you need to pay bills? So I could live comfortably. Why do you need to live comfortably? Because I want to. Because it makes me feel good. I remember I met someone that I knew when I first came into Chabad. We both started almost at the same time, but he advanced quicker than I did, and he moved. Well, I went to computer school, et cetera, et cetera. And I met up with him 2 years later, and I saw it, and I asked him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm giving classes." No, he says to me, I said, "What are you doing with these days?" He says, "I'm making money." I said, "How?" He said, "By giving classes." That struck me so odd. The focus was making the money, and the classes was just a means to make that money. Now, mind you, there's on the surface level, there's nothing wrong with it. It's an earnest living and it's honest living. But what is your purpose in life? Again, we're not Chas v'Shalom discounting living, and as the Rebbe said, in our generation, we should be physically wealthy. After everything that we went through and everything else, the Am Yisrael deserves wealth, material wealth. Nice home, nice this and this. But the Rebbe says the aim of that is not Chas v'Shalom to show off to the neighbor. But look at what I live, look at the means that I have, and so on and so forth, not to gain attention. It's in order to utilize all of it to serve Hashem. So the material is a means, not an end to itself. As Chassidus explains, a bigger house opens up the mind, the faculties of the mind. But the animal soul sees it very differently. The instinct of the animal soul is survivability. And the more we give into the animal soul's survivability, the more it wants, the more it revises what survivability is. To the extent that many times it could translate to toxicity. That if a person is in so its survivability would potentially eliminate people around them. And anyone who doesn't agree with them, or anybody who is not aligned with them even. Because its survivability is threatened. That's where the cancel culture comes from. And if you asked any of those people who are marching against Israel, against this, do you feel instinctually you're doing right? He says, of course. Could you give the reasoning? Not really. Do you understand the full gamut of what you're marching for? Not really. But I feel it. It's like a child. And a child, being that they don't have seichel, they don't have the intellect. Again, the intellect is embedded within the emotions. Thereby, the intellect's sole purpose is to propagate the emotions, but not to reason if these emotions are correct in the first place, and certainly not to create a balanced emotions, a holy emotions, which is driven by the intellect. Parents need to raise their children, not children tell the parents what to do. And the child it's the emotions tell the parents, the intellect, what to think about and where to lead to, and so on and so forth. And because of that, the child cannot bear opposites. Chesed cannot bear gvura. Fire cannot bear water. Water cannot bear fire. Therefore, if somebody contradicts a child, the child will be upset, could throw a tantrum. And the next second, he'll be very happy and excited. Because it's just pivoting between one emotion to another without any intellectual lead. And therefore, there isn't an emotional synthesis. There's no tiferet. There's no middle path here. It's either or. It's either you're with me or you're against me. There's no in the middle here. It's either you're 100% right or 100% wrong. It's just that the 100% right is right according to my standards. You could be unique like everybody else. You have freedom of speech, so long as you speak the words I like to hear that make me feel good. But if you challenge, then then instinctually I can't stand you. We got a conflict. I got to cancel you out. For this, in davening, we say, Oseh shalom b'mromav. Hashem makes harmony in his abode. And as Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, which harmony does Hashem need to make in heaven? Says that in heaven we have the angel Gabriel and Michael and Gabriel. The angel Michael is the angel of kindness, of water. The angel of Gabriel is Gvura, a fire. And naturally the conflict. Water and fire put themselves out. They extinguish each other. But as Alter Rebbe brings the parable, when two ministers of the king might be at odds with each other, but as soon as the king enters his chambers and in front of enters the chamber where both of these ministers might be at odds with each other, they stand in complete and utter nullification towards the king. All their personal conflicts moves aside. And when the king orders them to work together, they must work together. There's a parable that the Mitzvah Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, gives in one of his discourses. If you put a miser, someone who essentially hoards every single penny, you put him in the room together with a spendthrift, a person whose every penny that they receive flows right away, a hole in their pocket, as you call it. Let them argue their philosophies of life. Which was more prudent? Is it spending or is it saving? They potentially could argue forever because incidentally, they're both led by the very same logic. The spendthrift will say you have to spend every penny you have. You know why? Because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And the miser will say you have to save every single penny because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Well, from that lens, they'll be arguing forever because each one has a respected philosophy based on the same logic. But when we analyze and assess the characteristic of a business person, we find that that within the business person, both the miser and the spendthrift, both the gvura and the chesed, are embedded into their characteristics and work in tandem with each other and complement each other. Because both chesed and gvura, both the spendthrift and the miser, within the business person's characteristics, are nullified to the higher will, which is to make money. For that reason, if right now making money means that we have to save everything, so we'll have what to invest later on, that's what's necessary to do. And vice versa. There is no, for a true business person, there's no friction or anxiety, should I or shouldn't I? It comes just like that. Because everything's trained according to that, from that lens. So the question is, when we say being led by natural instinct, the question is whose instinct, which instinct? I'm not, Chas v'shalom, suggesting not to pay attention to our instinct. But the question, if we're going to be led by it, then we've got to assess and make sure that it is streaming from the correct place. Ayin Tovah, as we learned last week, originates in faith in the quintessential self. In the essence of the neshama, of the soul, which is always bound with Hashem, where faith originates from, as we learned in the Yutat Kislev talks. Ayin Tovah sees everything and perceives everything from God's perspective. So it might be tasty, it might be tart, or it might be not tasty. This might feel good, it doesn't feel good. It's easy or it's difficult. What's the difference? It's all God. Question is, how do I reveal it here? What's needed from me? From the instinct of the godly soul is Ani nivreiti l'shamesh koni. I was created in order to serve my master, and therefore every moment of our lives is a service. So the instinct is, how do I serve in this moment? What is needed from me? Not what I need from this moment. What is needed from me? Not what's going to be easy or more difficult. And what gives us the map and the framework is a Torah. So for example, I'll give you an example when it comes to tzedakah. Tzedakah is one of when stam mitzvah in the Torah, when the Talmud just stams, there was plainly said the word mitzvah, it's referred to tzedakah. And there's a lot of depth to this. But we know that sometimes a person gives tzedakah not because, as we discussed last week, not because it's tzedakah. What's the difference between charity and tzedakah? Charity is I have money, enough money for myself, and I see somebody less fortunate than me. I want to be a good person. I want to help. Let me help them. That's charity. Tzedakah doesn't mean charity. The root word of tzedakah is tzedek, the righteous thing. It's the righteous thing to do, independent of your need to feel good or feel generous. What if you don't have that need? You will not give? Tzedakah is a mitzvah because God said so, not because we feel the need to be more charitable, to elevate our spirit, to give us a better public image. That's not tzedakah, that's charity. And incidentally, in tzedakah, there's a framework. First and foremost, you need to make sure your household is in check, that everything that's necessary for the household to function is there. Then you go out to your extended family members. Then you go to your friends in your community, and then you go to the state, and then you go to the country, and so on and so forth, and then outwards. And this is not just in financial, but as we discussed several weeks ago, this is also with our presence. As the saying goes, tzedakah begins at home. I believe we discussed that the story of that shaliach, the emissary who's so successful, and as the custom is that the shaliach should write their activities, everything that they've done, some people did it every week, every 2 weeks, every month, but a sum total of everything that was done, and not just summaries, but actually detail it. One particular shaliach gave a Rebbe such a report that most of us would be very, very envious of. How many activities, how many people he comes into contact with, in fact, how many institutions he's built, and so on and so forth. When the Rebbe, in the Rebbe's response to this report, the Rebbe noted Yesher Koach for all the amazing activities. I'm paraphrasing now. But Yesher Koach for all the great activities, but I didn't notice anything that any report of your activities at home. Al Kol Panim, however, the Rebbe says, from this point on, I would like to see the report of what you're doing at home as well. And it should be carried out with the same warmth and enthusiasm and vibrancy and pioneering that you do for other things. Why am I saying this? Because seemingly doing good things is great. It's great. You're helping and so on and so forth. The question is, who are you doing it for? Now, again, as we spoke about many times, a person, even if a person is doing it for alternative reasons, don't stop doing it. Alternative reasons doesn't mean that you really have an alternative agenda. It means that the G-dly Soul, every single time we do a mitzvah or we learn Torah or whatever it is, even seemingly for the wrong reasons, we should continue because, as the Talmud says, from doing it out of alternative reasons, eventually you'll come to doing it for the right reasons. But as Chassidus emphasizes, mitoch shelo lishma yavo lishma, from within of an alternative reason means inside, embedded within the alternative reason is a correct reason. What does that mean? That all mitzvot that we do originate in the G-dly Soul. All desire to learn Torah, to do a mitzvah, to daven, to give tzedakah, whatever it is, all of it originates from the G-dly Soul. Internally, that is. Just that the animal soul will take that signal from the G-dly Soul, embezzle it for its own use, and then create an interior reasons for why, on a conscious level, the person wants to do it, or maybe even on subconscious, but nevertheless. But having said this, the risk of doing something out of one's for one's own needs is what happens when a person doesn't have the need anymore. When you stop doing. That's the difference between goodness and holiness. As the Alter Rebbe states in the beginning of Tanya, that the animal soul is capable of being benevolent, generous, even compassionate. But it does so for its own need. Holiness functions independent of one's own personal needs. Holiness originated in Hashem. Hashem says what's holy, what's not. So when Hashem says keep Shabbos, what if you're not tired? These long summer days, like you have hours and hours. Okay, I could rest for an hour, whatever it is, right? You have 9 hours after Shacharit. I don't need to rest. But Shabbat is not for you to rest. Yes, the mitzvah of Shabbat is to cease from all activities and to rest, and it's actually a mitzvah to rest on Shabbos. But what if you're not tired? Shabbat is there because God said so. As we receive the Torah, we said, "Na'aseh v'nishma." First and foremost, I'm committing to do. I'm committing to do blindly. But of course, says Na'aseh and then the nishma. But I committed, and no matter what, I'm going to do it. Now I'm going to start learning about it. What is it? What's the purpose? How does it function? And so on and so forth. What is its feat, and how does it affect my consciousness and my life? Fine, that's all good, and we have to delve more and more and more, as deep as possible. Again, questions are good, and because questions perpetuate our journey and so on and so forth. So long as it's an earnest question where we want a genuine answer. But as we learn many times, a good question should never, chas v'shalom, prevent a good deed. Holiness stems from Hashem. Goodness stems from the animal soul. Goodness is self-serving. Holiness serves Hashem. By definition, holiness, kadosh, means moved down, separated. In other words, it's separated from the human condition. Our aim is to draw the holiness into the framework of the human condition, and that to the world at large. But we have to assess, not chas v'shalom prevent, even if we assessed, and again, even if we assess and we came to realize that some of our goodness, our so on and so forth, is done out of an alternative reason, don't stop. Just try to refine it, but don't stop. I'll give you an anecdote. There was a very great philanthropist back in the old country. And in those days, this is going back about 150 years ago, in Ukraine, the Jewish people were living through financial dire straits, to put it mildly. And those who made it, those who made it financially, would often help the communities, the rabbanim and the schools and so on and so forth, and then of course the families and whatever they needed. Well, there was one such philanthropist who gave generously. Everybody knew that his address was the one to go and knock on his door when you need. And of course, he was always obliged. Until one particular time, when he got a knock, he opened with a unhappy countenance and started berating the people who came to him. He says, "What do I look like, a bank to you? What's the matter with you guys? Keep on coming and coming and coming. What, my bank? Go get work. Why are you coming to me? And this repeated itself over and over. And all of a sudden, the once generous philanthropist became a miser. And nobody understood it. But they got the point. Eventually, they stopped coming. Well, about a year later, this philanthropist came into a public marketplace and made a public announcement that whoever needs any financial help, come to me. I'm here for you. And indeed, he started giving again. At some point, someone approached him and says, I don't understand. You were generous, and then you became very, very ungenerous. And now you're generous again. What is this? I said, I'll tell you the truth. For years and years, I was contributing to every cause, every family, every single tool and school and this and that. And I started thinking to myself, who am I really doing this for? Am I doing this for God, as a sense of out of a sense of mitzvah, or am I doing it for myself because it gives me pleasure to help? Because I like the recognition of being the town philanthropist. And in order to weed any of those sentiments out, I thoroughly worked on myself throughout the year. To not want to give. Explain to myself over and over why I shouldn't, why it doesn't make sense that everybody comes to me. In other words, for an entire year, I revised everything I knew about tzedakah in order not to give. Once I came to a thorough conclusion that I don't want to give tzedakah, I don't like it, I think this is ridiculous that people come. Once I came to that conclusion, now I'm ready to give tzedakah. Now I'm ready to fulfill the mitzvah. Because it's not coming from my need. It's solely responding to Hashem's command. Now, I'm not suggesting to be that extreme, but rather to utilize this anecdote as a framework to raise ourselves up. Not to prevent ourselves from doing something good again. It's no matter how, whatever alternative reason we think we have, but the goodness originates, the holiness, a mitzvah always originates in the godly soul. So the question regarding our natural instinct, the question is, where is this natural instinct emanating from? Again, I'm not saying to ignore it. God forbid. We have an animal soul for a reason, a divine reason, a holy reason. But the animal soul in its whims and all of it, every part of it needs to be trained, needs to be refined, needs to be raised. So the service is to first and foremost not question our self-motivation, but to really inspect and ask ourselves, okay, it might be even good. As we said before, the animal soul is capable of doing goodness. But to start moving away from self-serving to serving Hashem. In serving Hashem, of course, serves oneself as well. Because the Torah says we must take care of ourselves physically, emotionally, mentally, of course, spiritually. And to maintain a healthy and holy home, in other words, it should be clean, it should be food, and it should be, as we said, even wealthy and so. But it's all there to serve Hashem. And incidentally, as we discussed in our nurturing relationships class, self-care emanates from self-worth, as well as self-work is predicated on self-worth. Without this intrinsic self-worth, in other words, internal, based on an essential truth that I'm godly, self-work tends to be nothing more than self-escape. You're not running towards yourself, you're running from yourself. And self-care, we see when someone doesn't possess or hasn't yet developed this intrinsic self-worth. That's our aim as parents, to give our children. But if God forbid, for whatever reason, Hashem decided that these parents are going to leave this space empty for you to develop on your own, for whatever reason. But if a person doesn't have self-worth, intrinsic self-worth, then often self-care is also going to fall by the wayside. They're always going to be taking care of others and this. And we ask, what about yourself? I say, no, there's no time for me. Yeah, this and this. It's not, but that's not healthy. That's certainly not holy. Hashem wants us to maintain ourselves, to work. So the Rambam says that working on our physical self, literally, and maintaining a healthy body, is part and parcel of serving God. But for that, you need to understand how holy your body is and how holy you are, and why it's important. In other words, when you ask the world, why do you go work out? I want to look good. I want to feel good. Why? Because I do. Or I want to be healthy. Why? So I can live longer. But for what? Why do you need more time? So we have to assess the question, is our natural born instinct, is it flowing from the animal soul? And if it is it as refined as it needs to be? And of course, it doesn't contradict Ayin Tovah, as you said in the beginning. One can operate with a natural instinct, but the godly soul must govern that instinct to make sure that it's flowing correctly. And how do you know? If first and foremost, it views everything as godliness, as goodness, of holiness, of light, potential opportunities, constantly, everywhere, with all people, all times. That's Ayin Tovah. That's the expansive eye. Unlike the Ayin Tzara, the contracted eye, which sees everything very minimalistic. Everything's small. Everybody's small. This one is this issue, and he's trying to do this to me. She's trying to do that, and constantly trying to minimize. So after Rabbi explains, a child, what makes a child happy? Toys, sweets, and everything. Why? Because the child's mind is undeveloped. So from their perspective, they're seeing everything small. As our minds expand, so do our aspirations. Who cares about the candy? It's nice and everything, but who? Okay, we're going to make our entire life about it. I think we mentioned this once. We know that with children, children have, especially infants, have an aversion towards showers, baths, water. They become afraid of it. So how do we wash our kids? We have to put them in a bath and fill the bath with nice, pleasant, tepid, warm water with bubbles and a rubber ducky and ships and everything. And the child starts playing with it and so on and so forth and having a good time. And then once the child is distracted, the parent says to the child, "Put your head back. I'm going to wash your head," and so on and so forth. From the child's perspective, the entire aim is to play in the bathtub. Feels good, it's fun, and so on and so forth. Except for there's this pesky adult who from time to time interrupts my play. But the focus is the bath. As adults, we realize it's nice to take a bath, but if you how much time do we have to take baths? You get into a shower, in and out, because of the need. When you need to take a shower, you take a shower. Particularly like Erev Shabbos, it's a mitzvah to take a shower, and so on and so forth. For some people, unfortunately, as the previous Rebbe noted and the Rebbe mentions, we don't determine a person's age based on what's written on their passport. Because we can have babies with white hair. In other words, a person who never really matured. And so from this lens, the entire world is like their bathtub for them to come and have a good time and play around and so on and so forth. And from time to time, you need to do something important as well. This is how Freud understands, or being that Freud's perspective. And again, as we said many times, psychology, Freud got the animal soul perfect. Just the lowest, Freud's assessment of the animal soul is from the lower tier of the animal soul, which is a willful pleasure. I'm only here as a pleasure-seeking machine. So how do you explain that a person is able to sit behind a desk for 8 hours a day and not act animalistic? Because he recognizes that at the end of the day, he's making money so he can have more pleasure. So for that, it's well worth to tame yourself for 8 hours so you could get more pleasure at the end of that. In other words, the entire purpose, the entire aim is the world's my bathtub, and I want to have a good time. It's just from time to time, I need to do something important in order to perpetuate that good time. The godly soul sees every single frame of life as potential holiness. It doesn't matter how it is, where it is, if it's in shul, or if in school, if it's in a playground, on the internet, whatever it is, every moment is an opportunity to reveal God. From this lens, we could say, yes, it's okay to maintain your natural instinct, but make sure that it's not functioning independently of your true self. Hone it in, refine it. Because the animal soul doesn't know how to distinguish. We know, like, for example, a dog will have an amazing bowl of food that its owner bought with the most expensive dog food with all the meats and nutrients and everything else. The dog could eat in the bowl at home, but when it goes out, it'll run to the garbage pile to eat from there as well. There's no distinction. This is food, this is food. It doesn't know how to distinguish which was proper or not proper for it, unless it's really trained. So we must make sure that we train our animal soul. Hone it in. Not chas v'shalom, eliminate it. Not chas v'shalom, disregard the physical, the corporal, or anything. Our entire aim as a Jewish people is to to utilize the world in order to refine it, elevate it, and transform it to be a hospitable abode for Hashem, according to the Torah, according to God's desire. But in order to do this correct, the Zohar tells us about iskafia, impulse control. Not just to blurt out whatever you want, when you want, and how you want. Not just to think whatever you want, when you want, how you want, and certainly not to act however you want, when you want, even when you feel justified. Of course, let's just say, for example, as the Alter Rebbe gives in the Tanya, you have a plate of kosher food in front of you. It's all 100% kosher. It's 100%. It's not just kosher. It's a top tier kosher, and it's time to eat. Here is kafia would be, I know the food is in front of me. I'm going to wait for a minute, just a minute. In that minute, I'm going to learn something. I'm going to think about something holy, whatever it is. Then I'm going to eat. This is how we train our animals. We're telling it we are in charge of you. You're not in charge of us. Just because the food is in front of us doesn't mean we need to prance upon it, pounce upon it. Wait. You want to say something? Hold on for a second. Assess it. Is it holy? Is it going to generate more godliness? Is it going to connection? And so, if not, hold on. I know I have the right to, but who said I need to? That's what's needed for me right now. That's how we refine our instincts to be much more analogous to the Ayin Tovah. Because after all, it is our animal soul which controls our sight, our physical sight. As we said before, the animal soul controls all of our physical corporal processes. Our entire physicality and corporality is our animal soul. So we train the animal soul to act as a conduit for the godly soul. That is an impediment, because that inner conflict is where anxiety comes from, when they're not in tandem, when they're functioning independent. It's like the husband and the wife are separated from each other. That's when the angst at home begins, because they're meant to align and complement and complete each other. So too, the husband and the wife, the godly soul and the animal soul, must work in tandem. Otherwise, that's where anxiety begins and all kinds of issues begin, like depression, which is depressed when the body can no longer process the caricature that the persona became in order to feel good about itself, whatever it is, losing its essential self. So it goes into shutdown. But that's because the godly soul and animal soul are not working in tandem. And the animal soul is not a conduit rather than a full blockade, which is holding the godly soul hostage. Not distinguishing between what's holy, what's not, what's good, what's not good, doesn't matter. I feel I'm not safe, I'm not this and this for this reason. I have all the rights to do whatever I think because I need to survive. Again, those instincts might have been shaped by earlier situations, as we know that the person's early life shapes the way they become as an adult. So perhaps they didn't feel safe at certain points, and whatever it is, and it was pressed upon over and over to the point it became part and parcel of the person's perspective. But again, what keeps a person in trauma mode and shutdown mode, et cetera, is the inability to let go of old patterns, to at least revise old definitions. Yes, I know I was heard before. I need to be more careful, and so on and so forth. But not everyone is out to hurt me. This is God's world, after all. And even though those who did, I shouldn't hold a grudge, because for one reason or another, I needed to go through that. Yes, it hurt. Yes, they chose with their own choice to do this, but nevertheless, I need to go through this. Otherwise, Hashem wouldn't put me through this. So why should I hold a grudge? Why should I be upset? Why should I be constantly suspicious, constantly apprehensive, constantly deflective, offensive? Who needs that? The hardest part of overcoming the trauma is letting go of the defense mechanisms, the layering and the armors that were put during the trauma. And that's because trauma really doesn't, I'm talking right now from a psychological perspective. Trauma doesn't traumatize a person. It's the way that the person tells them, so the narrative that they have that perpetuates it. He did this, she did this, and how dare they? It doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. That's what traumatizes a person. That creates instinct, survivability instinct, which is part and parcel of the defense mechanisms. Because they're not real survival here as much as sheltering yourself. It's like that famous after the Korean War, years and years after the Korean War, they found there was a soldier who was hiding, that he ran in the middle of a battle and he hid. And he didn't know that the war finished until they sent his general to tell him directly years after, you could come out. The war is done. So from this lens, we have to say, yes, it's the issue is not what's the problem with the natural instinct, is as much as assessing, is our natural instinct conducive of our life? Is it following the framework of Torah, of holiness, of goodness, of kindness, independent of being self-serving? Because otherwise, once a person gets hurt, I don't want to be good anymore. I don't want to be compassionate. Being compassionate and good only gets me hurt. So what's the point? Opening up, being vulnerable, loving, that hurts me. So I don't want to. That's my instinct. And if you try to invade on that, we're going to have issues. So we just need to refine it, to scale it in according to its actual needs, which is to maintain the physical body, the corporal processes, to give us a sense of what's safe, what's not safe. But from the lens that, of course, Hashem is holding us up, and of course, Hashem is with us. And every frame of life is not a potential risk, but a potential elevation. And from this, we need to, if this is what the instinct should be utilized for. Again, we're not Chas v'Shalom suggesting to ignore the natural instinct, to ignore the physical, the corporal, God forbid, but to make sure that our animal soul, our instincts, and et cetera, are conducive, not impeding. And how do you know? Well, very simple. Once again, the question that we rose several times already. How do you view yourself? How do you view the circumstances? How do you view the people around you? Not only the ones we agree with, but even the people who we vehemently disagree with. There was Y.Y. Jacobson, Simon Jacobson's father, Gershon Jacobson. I had the privilege of meeting him, sitting and listening to him several times before he passed away. He was a great journalist. Actually started a very famous publication, their Allgemeine Journal, a newspaper that was written in Yiddish. And as a journalist, he was a Chabad Chassid through and through, but he was a journalist. And in his publication, he didn't just allow froom people to write. He also allowed people who were very antagonistic of Yiddishkeit to write there. For example, there was a column in his newspaper by a journalist who once he brought to the Rebbe for kosher bracha. Now this guy was frum. He was born in a frum home, but then in the after the erection of Israel in 1948, he became very cynical towards the government and so on and so forth, and all Judaism, because he said this is not what it's supposed to be, and basically he veered off, and he became very antagonistic of Israel, of this and this and so on and so forth. And he wasn't, he stopped being observant. But Jacobson allowed him to have a column. And once Jacobson brought him to the Rebbe by kosher bracha. The Rebbe after Yom Tov would give from the Havdalah cup wine to all the passersby with a blessing. So when Jacobson and he walked by the Rebbe tells him, I read your column. I read your column a lot. And he says, Rebbe, you read my column? I wouldn't think that you would agree with what I write. Why would you read it? The Rebbe said, if I only read about columns of people that I agree with, I would have very little to read. You have a great gift for writing. You must utilize it to reveal God. The story is an amazing story. It continues, but that's a hope for bringing by itself. But you see, even with people you don't agree with, who are very antagonistic of your views, you could find a point of connection and elevation. As we learn in the nurture relationship class, where the Rebbe told the Rav who was antagonized and his position was threatened by another rabbi, and then later on when this Rav wanted to open up a slaughterhouse for animals, the Rebbe instructed him to bring this other Rav, who was antagonistic and so on and so forth against his way and so on and so forth, to make him part. He says to the Rebbe, but we don't agree. It says there's 620 mitzvot, 613 biblical and 7 rabbinical, and all their offshoots. You don't agree on one particular one, fine. There are others. 619 other mitzvot. You're going to make everything about one and then cancel 619 because of that. You don't agree. Okay, you don't agree. Who said you need to agree? So we must make sure that our instincts, while they're there to protect us from getting hurt and so on and so forth, but are not chas v'shalom dismissive of our mission. So does that answer it in a nutshell?
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Good. Baruch Hashem, we'll continue in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.